Imagine you are watching the news. The cameras show the Tel Aviv sky lit by points of fire. Dozens of interceptors go up in response. Explosions. Flashes. The narrator says that the defense systems worked perfectly. And then, the next day, satellite images reveal craters at an Israeli air base in the south of the country. More than 30 missiles had penetrated the defense. The official narrative crumbles in the face of evidence. This is not a fictional scenario. This happened in October 2024, when Iran launched its second direct operation against Israel, the so-called True Promise 2, and a significant part of the projectiles managed to cross one of the most sophisticated air defense systems on the planet. But what does this scene really reveal? It reveals that Iran, over decades of isolation, sanctions and war, has built something that few countries in the world possess: a self-sufficient, technologically advanced and strategically sophisticated ballistic missile force. This video is not about a battle. It's about a process. A process that began on the devastated battlefields of the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s and reached the aerospace engineering laboratories of Tehran, where scientists with doctorates reviewed by the best European and American universities redesigned, perfected, and multiplied every missile that Iranian hands could touch. The person who really understands this is Scott Ritter, former United States intelligence officer and former United Nations weapons inspector. In a revealing interview, Ritter opened up about the true capabilities of Iran's missile program. Your words are the backbone of this analysis. Throughout this video, you will understand what really happened, and is happening, with Iran's military program. We will explain how this program was born, how it evolved, why Westerners underestimated it for so long, and what are the most likely scenarios for the coming years in a region that always seems to be on the brink of the abyss. The question that guides this entire analysis is simple but disturbing. Are we facing a second-tier regional arsenal, or facing one of the most advanced missile forces in the modern world? Stay with us until the end. The answer will surprise you. The central source of this analysis is an interview given by Scott Ritter, former U.S. Army intelligence officer and former UN weapons inspector. Ritter is one of the most qualified voices in the Western world when it comes to arsenals of mass destruction and missile programs in the Middle East. He was physically on the field. He interrogated scientists. He inspected facilities. And he reached conclusions that challenged the dominant narrative about Iran. Ritter starts with the origins. The Iranians developed their missile capabilities during the Iran-Iraq War, the conflict that lasted from 1980 to 1988 and left more than 1 million dead. Saddam Hussein's Iraq possessed Soviet-made Scud missiles and used them against Iranian civilian cities. Tehran's response was pragmatic and immediate: get the same missiles. First they came from Syria, after Libya. And when these options closed under international pressure, Iran sought an adapted version of the Scud from North Korea. Iran acquired Scud technology from regional allies and North Korea during the 1980s as a direct response to Iraqi bombings. This starting point is more important than it seems. Iran did not begin its missile program out of imperial ambition. It started with survival. And military programs born of the need to survive tend to generate an institutional resilience that programs born of ambition rarely develop. But the most revealing part of Ritter's analysis concerns the intellectual capacity behind this program. In his words, when talking to inspectors from the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, about Iran's nuclear program, one of the technicians told him something that changed his perspective. "Scott, what you need to understand is that we are dealing with a group of nuclear scientists, all educated to the highest possible standards." Ritter claims that Iran has the highest percentage of international peer-reviewed nuclear doctoral theses, published in Europe and the United States, of any nation in the world. This is not Iranian propaganda. It is the evaluation of international inspectors who read and evaluated the scientific work. When engineers of this qualification take a Soviet-era Scud missile and start reverse engineering it, the result is not an inferior copy. It is a starting point for systematic improvements. And that's exactly what happened. According to Ritter, Iranian engineers immediately identified 3 areas of improvement: the liquid fuel engine, the guidance and control system, and the aerodynamic optimization of the fuselage. Each generation of missiles brought improvements in one or more of these areas. And after 4 generations, Iran made a fundamental strategic decision to produce at scale. Iran has dispersed its arsenal across dozens of locations, including so-called underground missile cities, created precisely to protect the stockpile from preemptive strikes. This decision to produce and stockpile large quantities of missiles completely changed the strategic calculus of any potential adversary. U.S. intelligence analysts say Iran has the largest stockpile of ballistic missiles in the Middle East. The real test of this arsenal comes in 2024. In April, in the first Operation True Promise, Iran fired approximately 120 ballistic missiles toward Israel. Then, in October, came the second round, without warning, made up almost entirely of ballistic missiles. The second offensive was launched without warning and consisted mainly of ballistic missiles, which can reach their targets in a matter of minutes. Ritter explains the logic behind this tactical choice. Older liquid fuel missiles were fired en masse to saturate air defense systems. The objective was not to destroy Israel with these missiles. The goal was to deplete high-value interceptors, the Arrow, the Patriot, the David Sling, by causing them to waste expensive ammunition on cheaper, antiquated projectiles. Analysis of satellite imagery from the October 2024 offensive indicated that more than 30 Iranian missiles struck an air base in southern Israel. This demonstrates a tactical sophistication that goes beyond simple mass launch. Iran is using a layered saturation doctrine, just as nuclear powers plan attacks on advanced missile defenses. And then comes the most technical and revealing part of Ritter's analysis: decoyed maneuverable warheads. He describes what any observant observer can see in the publicly available videos. A missile arrives, releases a carrier vehicle, which in turn disperses brighter decoys forward. The Iron Dome system and other interceptors target the decoys. Meanwhile, the real warheads accelerate on slightly altered trajectories, executing smooth S-shaped maneuvers that are enough to make interceptors miss the target by meters. And meters are all that matters when a bullet tries to hit another bullet. This level of engineering, warheads that maneuver, decoys that fool radars, redundant navigation systems, is not improvised. It is the result of decades of systematic investment in aerospace engineering. Following losses suffered in the 2025 conflict with Israel, Iran has intensified efforts to rebuild its missile program and has reportedly rebuilt its arsenal to approximately 2,000 systems. The ability to quickly reconstitute is, in itself, a fundamental strategic fact. A country that loses part of its arsenal in combat and rebuilds it within months is not a fragile actor. It is an actor with a consolidated defense industrial infrastructure. The event analyzed, Ritter's interview and the data it aggregates, is just the surface of something much deeper: the story of how a country under sanctions, threats, and isolation quietly built one of the most advanced and resilient missile forces in the modern world. To understand Iran's missile program, one must go back in time and understand a fundamental truth about Iranian strategic culture. Iran does not think in decades. Think about centuries. The country we now call Iran is the direct heir of the Persian Empire, one of the oldest and most sophisticated civilizations in human history. Cyrus the Great, Darius I, Xerxes. Persia was a regional superpower long before Rome existed. This sense of historical continuity is not romanticism. It is a real variable in the formulation of Iranian foreign policy and defense doctrine. The modern breaking point arrived in 1979. The Islamic Revolution overthrew Shah Reza Pahlavi, an ally of the United States, and established an Islamic Republic under Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. In months, Iran went from a strategic U.S. ally to a declared enemy. Sanctions began almost immediately. And with them, technological isolation. A year after the revolution, in September 1980, Saddam Hussein's Iraq invaded Iran. It was the beginning of 8 years of total war, one of the most devastating of the 20th century. Iraq had logistical and financial support from the United States, France, Saudi Arabia, and several European countries. Iran was alone, shrouded in an arms embargo, facing an enemy equipped with modern aviation, Soviet tanks, and, as already mentioned, Scud missiles that rained destruction on civilian cities. It was in this context that the missile program was born. Not as an aggression project. As an existential response. Iran needed to be able to respond to attacks on its cities. And for that he needed missiles. The lesson Tehran took from the Iran-Iraq War was indelible. When you don't have reliable allies, you need to build your own arsenal. When the embargo isolates you from the international arms market, you need to learn how to manufacture what you need. This lesson shaped all Iranian defense doctrine for decades to come. After the war, Iran found itself surrounded by potential adversaries in all directions. To the west, an Iraq that, despite the defeat in the 1991 Gulf War, continued to be a source of instability. To the north, former Soviet republics in transition. In the Gulf, Arab monarchies armed with cutting-edge American technology. And, at the bottom of it all, Israel, an undeclared nuclear power, and the United States, with military bases in Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, literally surround Iran on all sides. In this context of strategic siege, ballistic missiles are not a first-choice offensive option. They are the guarantee of survival for a state that knows that, in a conventional war against the American-Israeli coalition, there is no way to win. But with a sufficiently large and sophisticated missile arsenal, it can turn any aggression into an exercise at an unacceptable cost for the attacker. This is what strategists call asymmetric deterrence, and Iran masters it masterfully. Technological evolution followed a logical and impressive progression. In the 1990s, Iran reverse-engineered Scud technology to produce the Shahab-1 and Shahab-2 missiles, as well as the short-range Zelzal and Fateh rockets. In the 2000s, the country introduced longer-range systems such as the liquid-fueled Shahab-3 and began testing two-stage solid designs such as the Sejal-2. Each stage of this evolution was accompanied by improvements in guidance, range and defense penetration capabilities. The Fateh family, for example, flies on a trajectory that remains within the atmosphere throughout the flight, with small stabilizers that allow the rocket to be guided to the target with increasingly greater precision. The transition from liquid to solid fuel deserves special attention. As Ritter explains, a liquid fuel missile needs to be fueled before launch, a process that takes time, exposes the launcher to preemptive strikes, and requires complex logistics. Solid fuel completely changes this equation. The missile arrives ready-made, like an ammunition cartridge. It is placed in the launcher and fired within minutes. More than that, Ritter reveals something even more sophisticated. The Iranians have developed a hybrid fuel that can be precharged and treated like conventional ammunition. In a crisis scenario, when an attack is imminent, missiles can be supplied in advance and distributed to launchers spread across the country, ready to fire at any time. This mobility is crucial. Iran has dispersed its arsenal across dozens of locations, including underground installations known as missile cities, making any attempt to neutralize the arsenal with preemptive strikes extremely difficult. To eliminate Iran's missile capabilities, an adversary would need to simultaneously identify and destroy hundreds of targets spread across a country the size of Egypt and Turkey combined, many of them buried beneath mountains. The Iranian missile program is also part of a broader doctrine, the so-called axis of resistance strategy. Tehran has built a network of allies and proxies that ranges from Hezbollah in Lebanon, through the Houthis in Yemen, to armed groups in Iraq, Syria, and Palestine. Iran supplies missiles, rockets, and unmanned aerial systems to partners and proxies around the world, including Iraq, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Palestinian territories, Yemen, and Russia. This dispersion of ballistic capability is, in itself, a form of deterrence. An adversary attacking Iran does not just face Iran's arsenal. It faces the possibility of simultaneous responses from multiple directions, from Lebanon, from Yemen, from Iraq. It is an architecture of distributed deterrence that no other regional, and few global, actors can replicate. The closest historical parallel is the Soviet Union during the Cold War, which also used allies and satellite states as an extension of its military power, creating a diffuse threat zone that no amount of conventional attack planning could completely neutralize. But there is an important difference. Iran built this under severe sanctions, without the industrial apparatus of a superpower, relying primarily on human capital, its own engineers and scientists, and on selective strategic relationships with Russia, China, and North Korea. Reports indicate that China sent Iran large shipments of sodium perchlorate, an essential component for solid propellant in missiles, to the port of Bandar Abbas, in volumes that could facilitate the production of hundreds of new missiles. This demonstrates that despite international sanctions, Iran continues to have access to critical inputs through strategic partners who calculate that the cost of keeping Iran capable is worth more than Western approval. This is the historical and strategic context of the Iranian missile program. It is not an accident, it is not an anomaly, and it is not an improvised threat. It is the product of 50 years of lessons learned, technological adaptations, and long-term strategic investment. Every conflict has multiple layers of interest. The issue of Iranian missiles is no exception. To understand it in depth, we need to examine what each lead actor really wants, and what they're willing to sacrifice to get it. Iran's central strategic objective is the survival of the regime and the preservation of national sovereignty in the face of what Tehran perceives as an ongoing conspiracy by the West and Israel to promote regime change. This fear is not paranoia, it is a historical reading. In 1953, the US and UK orchestrated a coup d'état that overthrew elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh and reinstalled the Shah. The gains from the missile program for Iran are multiple: deterrence against Israel and the US, regional prestige, bargaining capacity in diplomatic negotiations, and a way to project power without needing a navy or air force comparable to those of adversaries. The risks are also real. The program fuels the justification for sanctions that strangle the Iranian economy, for diplomatic isolation, and for Israeli attacks on production facilities. Israel views Iran's missile program as an existential threat, not just a strategic one. A ballistic arsenal capable of saturating its defense systems calls into question the very viability of the Israeli state in the event of an expanded conflict. Israel's stated objective at the start of the June 2025 operations included eliminating the missile threat. According to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's gain in degrading the Iranian program is direct: more time, more security, more room for maneuver. The risk is equally clear. Each Israeli attack on Iranian facilities accelerates Tehran's determination to rebuild and improve its arsenal, turning the cycle of attacks and reprisals into a permanent generator of escalation. Washington has a complex position. On the one hand, it wants to contain Iran, protect Israel, and maintain its influence in the Gulf. On the other, it knows that an all-out war with Iran would be catastrophically expensive, in lives, in resources, and in political capital. The impressive advance of American military power in the Middle East has not yet been enough to compel Iran to negotiate an agreement that definitively ends its nuclear program and missile arsenal. The American narrative oscillates between coercion, sanctions, threats, targeted attacks, and diplomacy, as demonstrated by the rounds of negotiations mediated by Oman in February 2026. The problem is that each cycle of coercion without resolution reinforces the internal Iranian narrative that survival is only possible with more missiles, more nuclear capacity, more strategic autonomy. Both Moscow and Beijing have an interest in keeping Iran capable enough to be a strategic heft against the West, but not so powerful that it uncontrollably destabilizes the region. China supplies inputs for missiles and maintains trade relations vital to the Iranian economy. Russia uses Iranian drone technology in its conflict with Ukraine and offers Iran some diplomatic umbrella in the UN Security Council. For both, a capable Iran is useful. A collapsing Iran would be a dangerous power vacuum in its immediate neighborhood. Each of these actors looks at the same missile arsenal and sees something different. For Iran, it is an existential insurance policy. For Israel, it is a potential death sentence. For the US, it is a strategic management problem. For China and Russia, it is a geopolitical advantage to be cultivated with caution. This multiplicity of readings is what makes the Iranian missile program so difficult to resolve diplomatically. There is no agreement that simultaneously satisfies all these divergent interests. And until there are, Iran will continue building missiles. Based on everything we analyzed, the technical capacity of the Iranian arsenal, the strategic doctrine of asymmetric deterrence, the divergent interests of the actors involved, and the historical context of half a century, it is possible to construct a realistic prospective scenario for the coming years. The most likely scenario, in light of the available evidence, is neither an all-out war nor a lasting peace. It's something more complex and, in some ways, more disturbing, a silent arms race in which Iran continues to rebuild, innovate, and disperse its arsenal, while Israel and the US continue to carry out targeted attacks to degrade that capability, in a cycle that, instead of solving the problem, perpetuates it. American officials said Iran was producing about 100 missiles a month after the 2025 conflict, and the country has tested missiles and announced modest new capabilities in recent months. That's a production rate that no cycle of preemptive strikes can permanently neutralize, especially when the facilities are underground and dispersed. The logic of this scenario is clear. Iran had grown its missile stockpile from about 2,000 units at the end of 2024 to a projected 8,000 plus within 2 years. And it was exactly this accelerated pace of production of solid-fuel medium-range missiles that was a decisive factor in Israel launching Operation Rising Lion. But attacking production facilities does not eliminate knowledge. It doesn't erase the propellant formulas from the engineers' minds. It does not destroy the intellectual capacity accumulated over decades of research. As Ritter emphasizes, the Iranians have some of the most capable engineers in the world. As long as this human capital exists, the program will exist. In this scenario, what changes in the coming years is quality, not just quantity. Scott Ritter describes in detail what is already happening: missiles with maneuverable warheads, sophisticated decoy systems, navigation by multiple redundant systems that do not depend on Western GPS. Following the relatively poor performance of some missiles against American and Israeli air defenses in 2024 to 2025, Iran began seeking improvements in the maneuverability of its re-entry vehicles and warheads. The next technological leap is already underway. The Fatah hypersonic missile, which Ritter refers to as the Arashnik in its Iranian version, represents a class of threats for which no current defense system has been specifically designed. Hypersonic speeds, unpredictable trajectories, submunitions that saturate areas. Iran's long-range missiles are capable of hitting targets up to 2,000 kilometers away, covering the entire Middle East and parts of Europe. The economic impact of this scenario is often underestimated. Each Arrow 3 interceptor costs between $2 and $3 million. Each Iranian medium-range missile costs a fraction of that. The mathematics of warfare of attrition favors the attacker. A strategy that forces an adversary to spend $10 to knock down every dollar invested in an attack is an economically sustainable strategy for Iran, and unsustainable in the long term for Israel, which depends on American subsidies to maintain its defense systems. On a diplomatic level, this scenario suggests endless negotiations without a definitive resolution. Rounds of talks between the US and Iran in February 2026, mediated by Oman, showed that Iran presented proposals for flexibility in its enrichment program, but refused to discuss its ballistic missiles. This is significant, for Tehran, missiles are not a bargaining item. They are the guarantee that any agreement will be fulfilled by the other parties. At the regional level, the silent race scenario means that the Middle East will continue to be a region of chronic high tension, with periodic episodes of direct confrontation and long periods of shadow warfare, attacks on scientists, sabotage of facilities, cyber operations, targeted assassinations. The regional security architecture will remain deeply unstable, with direct effects on trade routes, energy prices, and capital flows. For the world, this has concrete implications. The Strait of Hormuz, through which approximately 20% of the oil consumed globally passes, remains vulnerable to any escalation in the Persian Gulf. Iranian firepower is capable of threatening American military assets across the region. A crisis in the Gulf immediately translates into energy price shocks with effects across the entire global production and consumption chain. The most optimistic scenario within this framework would be the emergence of a negotiated regional security architecture, a type of Middle Eastern Ostpolitik, in which actors accept the reality of the Iranian arsenal as a fait accompli and construct mutually verifiable non-aggression agreements. But this would require political concessions that neither actor appears willing to make in the short term. The prospective conclusion is this: Iran's missile program is here to stay. It can be degraded occasionally, but not eliminated without a war of total destruction that no rational power is willing to wage. And as long as it exists, it will continue to be the most determining geopolitical factor in the Middle East in the 21st century. We have reached the end of this analysis, and it is time to bring the threads together. What began as the story of a country buying used Scud missiles from desperate allies during a war of survival has, in 50 years, become one of the most advanced and resilient ballistic missile programs on the planet. Not by accident. Not by luck. By conscious strategic decision, by consistent investment in human capital, and by a historical lesson that Iran learned the hard way: in the world of power politics, sovereignty without deterrence is an illusion. Scott Ritter, with all the credentials of someone who has been on the battlefield and in international inspection laboratories, sums it up with brutal clarity: the Iranians are some of the most capable engineers you will encounter. When they reverse engineer anything, they don't produce a copy. They produce a starting point to surpass the original. This is a truth that the West has systematically refused to accept, and this refusal has a real strategic cost. Every time Western analysts dismiss Iranian capabilities as inferior or exaggerated, reality surprises them. In April 2024, when missiles penetrated Israeli defenses. In October, when 30 projectiles hit an air base. And according to the most recent data, in 2025, when hundreds of missiles were launched in a single conflict. Geopolitics is rarely about isolated events. It's about processes. And the process that this video documents, the methodical construction of an asymmetric deterrence capability by a state under maximum pressure, is one of the most significant processes in contemporary international security. Its effects will be felt for decades. Decisions made today, to attack or negotiate, to isolate or engage, to recognize or deny, will define the security architecture of the Middle East for a generation. Many of the decisions that have been made over the past 50 years regarding Iran will only be fully understood years later, when historians can see clearly what today's analysts only intuit. And the question that remains on the table is the most important of all. Does Iran's missile arsenal represent the final balance of power in the Middle East? Or is it just the next chapter in a story that is far from over? If this video has made you think differently about Iran, about military power, and about how geopolitics really works beneath the official statements and headlines, then it has served its purpose. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and stay tuned for upcoming reviews. Because the world is changing quickly, and understanding it requires going beyond the surface.